Good, got it. Is Joe physically where you are, Brandon?
So Joe is physically, Joe, Penny, and Stephen are all staying here with me in Wallingford. But it is Joe's kind of birthday week. And so he is actually just getting to see his daughter, Elise, for the first time. And they are going out and having a birthday dinner.
Right. His thing starts tomorrow at 9, so that's great.
Yes. And his he kind of will give the opening context setting for Regenerate Cascadia and how the work also fits into a broader kind of global picture tomorrow. And yeah, just before we start, Claire, would you like to say anything or?
Just more. It's wonderful to see so many of the faces that we saw in person. There's something very different about connecting on the ground than online, although online is a fantastic way of connecting all of this work. So yeah.
Yeah, and it is. It's wonderful that after this long period kind of getting to go around for the last 30 days, it's so wonderful to see everybody here. Let's see if I need to do anything here. Okay, well, yeah, so I think just to start, firstly, welcome everybody to our first Regenerate Cascadia Summit. As many of you know, this summit is a capstone event for our Regenerate Cascadia activation tour, which took several of us, Joe, Penny, Stephen, Claire, and myself, as well as a few others, Quinn, Kirsten, and Sean, to visit communities and sites where regenerative work is happening throughout the bioregion. Sorry, give me just a moment to...
Potter that's getting there?
No, it's a new dog tonight.
Oh.
So that's Lola. Who's
that might be my fault. Thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Yeah, so just to say that we were in each community for a very short time, and just as important as these events are themselves is what comes after. We want this to be a start of a conversation, a start of coming together to meet each other face to face and start building networks of trust in which we can support each other in the work that our world needs. As many of you know who hosted and joined us for this tour and summit, this has been a crazy ride. It's quite frankly amazing that we pulled off what we did with such short notice. And I think, as each of you knows, this could not have happened without each and every one of you. So I'd just like to take a moment and honor how much hard work went into the past month. So thank you to all of you. This summit is being hosted on Zoom all weekend. And if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, or you can find our Telegram channel at t.me/regencascadia. The full schedule can be found on our website, regeneratecascadia.org. And in the evening times during the week, next week, we will give windows for people to organize around each watershed. And then come together next week for a Cascadia Unconference, in which we'll work together to create the agenda and create work groups that we think are important. And anybody's welcome to host a session if they have something that they would like to share or organize. We'll be getting that up on the website probably throughout this weekend. And so just stay tuned, and we should have more emails going out soon. Because there are so many people here, please keep your microphone muted if you're not actively talking, and be respectful and thoughtful of the space we take up. Tonight's opening session will run until 7, and after that, we'll invite everybody to join us as part of a collective sense-making for what we hope to see come out of this week, and what the most important things we feel for Regenerate Cascadia are. We'd also, I think after Claire and I set a little bit of context later, we'd like to invite anybody who participated or helped host to share a little bit of their experiences about Regenerate Cascadia, and yeah, and just thoughts and feelings and some sharebacks. We are here tonight because this work that you and we are doing is important. Right now, we have a choice and a brief window in time to shape the future we live in for ourselves and for future generations coming after us. The reason we are here tonight is the same which has been gathering people here for decades. And to quote what Lansing Scott wrote more than 30 years ago, a growing number of people are recognizing that to secure the clean air, water, and food that we need to survive healthfully, we have to become guardians of the places where we live. People sense the loss in not knowing our neighborhoods and natural surroundings, and are discovering that the best way to take care of ourselves is to go out, take action for ourselves. When we define our places using the earth as the frame of reference, taking into account flora, fauna, land forms, climate, and so on, we are talking in terms of bioregions. Can we move from our status of internal colony of the American and Canadian industrial system used for resource extraction, technology, services, and holiday vacationing to a more self-reliant and self-determining bioregional community? Can we gain greater control of our common destiny? This quote in question was posed at the 1988 Cascadia Bioregional Congress by Lansing Scott and hundreds of other bioregionalists more than 30 years ago. Connecting this wisdom and legacy into the futures of our children and future generations is so important. So, to continue the quote, can we? Perhaps, but it all depends. It depends on what we do and how we do it. The challenge of change is great. Without a clearly articulated collective vision for what we want to do and coordinated strategies for how we move forward, our ability to effect deep and widespread change is stymied. Is there a way to create greater connective tissue between various parts of our movements for change so that we can strengthen and nourish one another? Can we interject a clear and comprehensive agenda for change into the stale debate that passes for politics these days? These are the questions and challenges that we must face, and it is in that hope that we have gathered over the past month and here tonight, not as an answer to this debate, but hopefully to open up a conversation. It is up to Cascadians, each in their own way, to create and promote these changes and lead the way forward rather than wait for someone else to do it for us. So, to gather advice on these questions, I would now like to invite Cluckadub, a Skagit elder and artist, Jay Bowen, whose families come from the Skagit, Yakima, Wenatchee, Warm Springs, Swinomish, and Vancouver Island, and whose people have inhabited this place for more than 40,000 years, to join me here. As an elder of this place and movement, as we open the summit, I would like to ask him to share advice and wisdom he may have for us, and as we enjoy, and how we might join to envision how we can come together to regenerate the Cascadia bioregion and our home. So with that, I would like to invite Jay Bowen to come and share any advice he might have.
Thank you very much for having me tonight, and it's an honor to be with such a wonderful group of people. Like I said at the meeting last week, gathered before us are the most important people of the world. And it may be a very somewhat small group right now, but in a few short years, there's going to be a long line of people waiting to get involved in this really, really important movement that is overseeing the welfare of our communities. You know, when Larry and I spent the weekend together, and we roughed out some ideas. And Larry is a wonderful person and a very knowledgeable man, and tremendous amount of information. But I wanted to bring things back down to a baseline. And so we developed a baseline, first of all. So anytime you're treating a patient, you have to have a baseline, no matter what it is. And so we came up with this. I'd like to propose we look at a baseline in our region. And this is all your regions, okay? And I'd like to have that be marked as pre-contact to Western influence. A time when the land supported a self-sustaining lifestyle, not only one of surviving, but thriving. In our particular region, the area sustained a population just within 20 miles of where I'm sitting right now, a population of over 40,000 people, pre-contact. Living off of nature, a nature-based diet, and building structures from nature-based resources. Proof that a population can survive and thrive coexisting with nature. Flora and fauna were vibrant, animal life was extremely diverse. Salmon and cedar, the crux of our native food and building materials, was so abundant, it would look like you could cross the river on the backs of a returning salmon. It is known that the first people in this area spend as little as 20% of their time taking care of their basic fundamental needs. 80% of their time can be used at their discretion. So when we talk to people about why should I do this? Why would I sacrifice everything to get something else? What you're getting is the most precious commodity in the world, time. I never could figure out how when the new people showed up to the area, they thought they could improve on our system. Everything is in balance. 20% of our time to take care of our needs, and 80% of the time was at our discretion. We've gone a long ways away from this point in a short 100 years. Just 100 years. In our effort to recognize our worldwide crisis, we may never be able to return to the baseline. But each effort, like each detractor, will move us in that direction. We have suffered from the 1,000 cuts against nature. Healing one at a time is the goal. Our goal is to identify goals and how to achieve them and affect our future. We need to recognize that we are part of nature. Our first job is to be a good steward of nature and enable each one of us to be sustained. Something I'd like to add to this is, for thousands and thousands of years, humanity has always eaten at the table of nature. But nature has always eaten first. And over the last 100 years, we have pushed nature to the side. And nature has always fed us as humanities, as human beings, out of the excess. And we need to go back to understanding that if we feed nature first, nature will in turn feed us and take care of us. I'd like to say thank you to all these wonderful people who are joining with the issues that have been in the hearts and minds and souls of the Native people for the last several hundred years. We have watched fields of camas disappear, fields of wild strawberries, huckleberries. We have watched the grasses and cedars be destroyed and no longer sustain a lifestyle. We watched the salmon disappear. And all this we have done, fought, and tried to find our voice with the community at large, to find allies. And now the message is finally getting out there to some very responsible, community-minded people who understand we are all one family. And our family is to take care of each other. And the only resource we have is our earth. I'd like to thank you all and welcome you to this lifelong fight of mine, my family, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandmothers, and joining in an effort to take care of each one of us as the new stewards of the area. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jay.
You're
And
welcome.
with that in mind as well, I would like all of us maybe to say thank you, Jay. And before the meeting, Jay did share the proper way of saying thank you would be Daha Dubs. And Daha Dubs. And so I'd love for all of us maybe just to unmute for a second. And we can also raise our hands with our thumbs facing out and just say Daha Dubs.
I'll do it.
Dupes.
You spoke in your first gadget word. Okay, one more word I'll share with you. In our language, we have no word for goodbye. Imagine that, there's no word for goodbye. And what we do is we say hoit, hoit, and that translates until I see you again. It's much better. Hoit, hoit.
Oi.
Right.
Thank you all.
Daha Dubs. Hoit.
Hoit.
So, well, that's really wonderful. And thank you so much. And with that, I would just like to take a moment and acknowledge that I'm living here in Seattle, which is the unceded lands of the Duwamish people and the Coast Salish peoples, many of whom are still federally unrecognized and who are still active participants and residents of our home. So if people would like to, this would be a great time. I thought it would be really nice if you haven't already. Maybe we could each share a land acknowledgement of the watersheds and the traditional stewards from for each of us, and we could do that in the chat and just throw it up there. And with that, I might also like to turn it over to Claire. Claire, would you like to take over?
Sure, and thank you. And yeah, it feels so good to be here. And having traveled through, not probably the first third I missed because I was busy organizing in Victoria, but to have met and seen some of the themes that have been emerging in the conversations, that was just a really wonderful, and it made me reflect on what I'm going to share with you, but also just how some of it was really, Jay, what you shared is very much what has been part of what is prompting this. And it was about, you know, Alfred Korzybski uses a phrase that just has become a favorite of mine, which is the map is not the territory. And we are living as if we are living in the map, and we don't even realize that the map is wrong. And we really need to know what the territory is. We need to go back and understand story of place, which is what so many of us who really are dedicated and care are spending time doing. But I think we need to hear that and hear it over and over again to just know how important that is. And I was thinking about that and thinking, you know, a story that I heard when I was in my late teens. I grew up in South Africa, and it was a mentor friend of mine. Her name was Carol Bakey, and she was now working in South Africa, but had spent many years working with the Inuit up north. And so this was the story that she shared with me, and it has impacted the way that I work. And it was that when an Inuit baby is born, and these were the people that she was working with. So it's, you know, the story she told me. The baby is named by the parents based on the circumstances of its birth. And the names are often something around rolling thunder, dancing skies, something that reflects something that was going on. And then at age 7 or thereabouts, the village or the community gives the child a name based on what they have observed of that child, in really trying to get to know who this person is. And the beautiful image of that an entire community can really be invested in trying to discover who this child is, rather than trying to impose who this child should be. A really massive difference. And then at puberty, the young adult, in consultation with their elders, gets to choose their own name. And they can either choose to keep the name they've been given as a child, or find a name that better suits who they are growing into. And so that story has stuck with me, that self-knowledge helps us to understand how we belong and how we can serve to our highest potential. It's the valuing of the essence of who we are that allows us to discern in a right relationship to so I later on, when I was at university, I accompanied my friend Carol Bakey, who introduced me to community development work in the heart of a very deeply polarized landscape in KwaZulu-Natal. And it profoundly shaped all of the work that I ever did. But that story was very much embedded in the way that she also practiced the way she worked. And she would work with where people were at, which required understanding and celebrating story of place. And that, in knowing who they were, there was self-actualization and agency that was possible, and that was where they were able to make consistent progress. So as a woman in a deeply patriarchal society, she kept having naysayers saying that she would never succeed in this really tense, politically divided environment. And over and over again, once she had gone through this process, these communities were actually incredibly resilient. And if you don't know of the concept of autopoiesis, which is self-creating, but according to the essence of who you are, it's a really powerful concept. And I really felt that this was a theme that I kept seeing as we went through each of the communities, and wanted to bring that forth and name it, because I think it's really important. So yeah, maybe I'll turn back to Brandon.
Yeah, I think that was really beautiful, Claire. Thank you. And I think at this point, we can be pretty flexible moving forward. I think most of us here have probably heard Joe's talk, Claire's talk, and Claire and my little spiel about what we're trying to do. But for those who aren't familiar, we can give a little bit of a review, which is just the idea of, so this idea for Regenerate Cascadia came about when Claire and I met in the Edge Prize in April of this year. And while we were there, it gathered 140 different people from communities around Salmon Nation. And we gathered over 8 weeks, and we met and we learned and we saw all of these really amazing projects. And Claire and I saw an opportunity, because as soon as the Edge Prize ended, all of this like amazing kinetic energy kind of vanished. And it was really too bad. And so we kind of thought of this idea of Regenerate Cascadia as a method where we wanted to focus on how we built to an event, and then also kind of how we co-created our time during the event, during the summit, to help us weave our pathways back down, and where we centered what happened before and after both the activation tour and summit just as much as the event itself. And so when we say that we want this to be the start of a conversation, I think that that's really important. And it's just been such an amazing time as we've traveled and weaved through communities, learning about all the different projects, seeing what all of you are actively doing. And I think now we want to provide space through this week and weekend, both to share all of our own knowledge, lessons that might be relevant for other people in the bioregion, but then also just create space where all of you can connect together and where we can really begin to envision. And I think the two things that we really want to focus on is this idea of building, helping projects weave themselves at a landscape level, and then really helping grow core teams in every watershed that can help see that work supported, and see all of these regenerative communities and projects really getting the support that they need, that they're not right now, and to break us out of these silos and the individual competitive funding nature, so that we can be working together. The second thing I think that we really want to grow is a community, and that's a community throughout Cascadia that can weave itself across landscapes and watersheds, where we can be connecting around shared interests and common purpose. And I hope that this weekend we can see a little bit of that. And Claire, I don't know if you have more that you'd like to add.
No, I think the maybe the piece that does run through this and is that it is going to require money to do some of this work, but I think how we come together and tell the story will help us put a budget together, which if for anyone who has done project development or any of this kind of work, sometimes in putting a budget together, it helps you actually focus on the details of what the next steps are and what's required. And in a very similar way, this is a really useful tool, but it's also really necessary that we, as we pull these threads together, about how we need to prioritize and how we will actually start to make decisions together, that is being pulled together into a larger budget process.
Yeah, I think at this time too, I think we might what might be really wonderful is we'd love to invite people to share a little bit about their own experiences, and I think either their hopes for what they'd like to see Regenerate Cascadia become, or positive experiences, and then also maybe we could open the space for sort of fears of what we don't want to see it become, and just have a little bit of a general dialogue. But especially for everybody who helped, I think everybody here played such an instrumental role. We'd love to just open it up and hear from some of you all, and maybe we can keep it short. And so if you would like to share, maybe raise your hand. You can go up into the corner of your window and you can hit the 3 dots, and you can yeah, just hit the raise hand or the reactions raise hand if you'd like to share.
I don't know how to do this, so I'm just gonna.
You can you've raised your hand. Go ahead, Christine.
So I've done fundraising, not in a big way, but off and on in my life. They say, oh, I could get blood from a turnip, but honestly, that's not to malign a turnip. And I didn't know if during this tour, when you were traveling through the different regions and cities and groups and towns, if there was a process that talked about fundraising, that identified people who either would be willing to be key fundraiser contact people, or whether or not they were identified in this region. We've gotten help here before. This is someone we could tap again, or don't we? You know, just how that worked, because I would like to be involved in fundraising in some way, but I don't know where to start.
Claire, would you like to respond? Or
Yeah, well, right now, I think what we're doing is just trying to identify what it is that, what are the core pieces that need funding, and that in order to be able to do this work. And the more that we have, essentially the stories that create that sense of understanding. One of the things that that we're seeing clearly is that core teams that are the people that are holding the relationships are some of the most important people in this process right now. And when relationship isn't what's valued, it a lot of the projects and the pieces start to fall apart. So we need a way of being able to support the people that are holding the relationships. And some of those, I also would like to just name that at different scales, there are people that are on the ground that are holding those relationships, and there are people that are holding relationships across different scales, and those are really important as well. And so it's sort of thinking about it in terms of that multi-tiered way of seeing it, because it requires all of that. So we know that those are important things. There are also ideas that have been floated around regenerative education, supporting youth in those things. So those are more specifically developed programs, possibly, you know, these are things that we'll get into, but there's some fairly core pieces that we know we've been identifying all the way along. around pro-social, and maybe something like a train the trainer program that would actually go and help develop those skills and that knowledge in different communities. Mapping and story of place, it would be very helpful to have people who have knowledge of that coming into communities. So these are things that have been coming up. Community art has been a really big one as well, in terms of surfacing story of place. And there are people that, you know, why reinvent the wheel when we've actually got this incredible wealth of people who have this knowledge, and actually they also help to weave some of the relationships. So these are things that are coming up, and I think before we can, we're just, the budget building process is what we're really working at right now. And I think we will be, on the Telegram group, there is a group for budgeting that people can jump into if that's an interest of theirs, and then developing from there. So.
And I just add also that in our collective sense making that we'll do after this session, that would be a wonderful thing to put on there, Christine. And then in addition, I think that that'll also be a session next weekend as well. For the tour, I think there were a few things that we really identified that we really wanted to work with. One of the most important is that we went and we met with people, and we met with people to meet people. And so we weren't going out partnering with organizations or doing this, but instead we were operating with the philosophy of that the right people that we meet, or sorry, the people that we meet are the right people to meet. And what comes of these events, you know, was the way it was supposed to happen. And I think what's really nice is that, you know, we literally like, I think reached out and connected with hundreds and hundreds of people. And there are so many people excited about this idea and project now. And so, you know, a lot of this will come. But we also want to make sure that we wanted to make sure, especially for the tour and for the summit, that there was no conflict or confusion about like money or what's the purpose or all the rest of it. This was just to identify people, I think, doing really amazing work in communities, and then reach out and connect with them about, and then start a conversation for, and what would we like to do next? So with
So
that,
in reply to Claire, there's no overarching fund that money would get raised into, and then someone would decide what's the priority and who needs what. It's just community by community.
So the goal of what we're doing is, so the long-term goal of all of this, and I think that there are people who are shifting these conversations, is the idea of a bioregional regeneration fund. And then what we'll do is work with the watersheds to actually create a framework which can help steward that. And a big part of that is that helps give teeth to actual governance and collective decision making. But with that being said, let's jump over to Mike. I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm on a server today, so I don't have any camera. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so very much for all that you've done. It's been mind-boggling to see, you know, in such a relatively short space of time. And really, I feel very uplifting and inspirational. So as you know, my sort of part in this is hopefully very much seed related. So hopefully I have some things to bring to everyone that'll be useful, you know. So that's all I wanted to say. Just thank you very much for all you've done. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Melanie, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. So if I'm hearing clearly, and again, I also, like Mike, want to express appreciation and gratitude for what it takes to hold a container for such things to show up. It's huge. What I'm hearing is that at this point, the convening, the relationships, the trust in understanding who's at the table, what we're bringing to the table, is the first step to get a feel towards each other and begin to create what sounds like it would become structure around bioregional focus And I think again about Joe Brewer's call out to us for bioregional learning centers as points of focus. And with Christine's questioning about budgeting, and then what I heard also about just budgeting in general as being a focusing agent, I get pretty excited about that because it feels like those bioregional centers that are organized along watersheds, and will determine how many of those are necessary, are going to be amazing starting points. The thing I'm curious about, I know that a lot of the ways we tend to do things in this culture are organized around money, and sure enough, it is very clarifying. But in honoring what I hear you all saying, I'm curious if a framework or structure that definitely had the budgeting, but not at the front end, that the possibility of doing it a little bit differently in my mind, and then the work that we do, is to take this foundation of relationships and values of who's at the table, and then looking at what the issue is that we want to accomplish together. What would the values of the project be? From the values of the project, it starts to become clear what systems and culture shifts need to happen if we're at this point and we want to get to that point. Then what we've learned in the process we do, helps to clarify what's necessary for next steps. What actions am I going to take that are going to show a difference against the systems and culture shifts that are in my wheelhouse and your wheelhouse and your wheelhouse? And then those accountabilities, those things spoken out loud, start to draw the clarity between the threads that want to weave between people. Starting with the budget seems kind of gargantuan and maybe familiar. I mean, it's certainly familiar to me, and I know with big projects it is, but I'm just curious if there might not be other ways. Well, I know that there's other ways that have been tried and true, and I just want to speak that into the space because it feels like values-based movement first, ecosystem mapping what there is to know from where we're at to where we go to, and then working towards the budgets, which of course clarifies specific action, if that might not be useful. So that's my curiosity. I just put that out there.
I love that. So that is, I think, such a wonderful point. And I guess just to speak to that, yeah, I think so. The bioregional learning centers and creating basically, how do we share learning across watersheds, across scales? And then how do we really, I mean, I think the reason why the funding keeps coming into it is how do we see our work supported? It's so important. And I think there needs to be a paradigm shift where we are actually supporting people who are on the ground leading the work, rather than asking them just to volunteer their time and do whatever. And then I think the other big shift is that when we come together collaboratively, it's actually easier for all of us. It's easier to work together. It's easier to share resources. It's easier to share knowledge and weave it. But especially as we've been traveling, what's become really clear is that the issues that we are facing and that different communities are facing are not unique. When we were traveling around the islands, the issues of affordable housing and all of these things, and I think Joe is going to paint a really nice picture of this in his opening keynote tomorrow, but these issues are all the same. And so to take it back to what you were saying, I think that those three elements of a bioregional learning center and in each watershed and with these core teams is really about how do we develop a story of place? How do we help root and connect people into place? And then how do we do that with the regenerative movement mapping? That's got to be, I think like you said, we need to identify the communities and projects that are out in each watershed, and that needs to be led by the local people on the ground, and it's them working together who can help us build these maps. And only then, just as importantly, can we see who is missing and how do we connect more people into it. And all of that is so foundational and fundamental to what we're doing. So
I'm going to respond as well, and Jeff actually put it in the chat. I think one of the big shifts came just through the work we were doing with bioregional catalysts within Earth Regenerators, and then in the design school for Regenerating Earth, was once we started to look at the common land model, where they talk about funding a landscape for 20 years, because that's how long, if you're going to get your head around like what it takes to actually do regeneration, it's going to take, as Joe said, 500 to 1,000 years. It's like well outside of our lifetimes. But when we're thinking about a project and even the funding it's going to require, and one of the core first pieces is supporting a core team who are the people that are helping to hold the relationships. And I mean, just to be straight, it's not sustainable for people like Brandon and myself and others to do this work without being financially supported. It has to be supported. And there are others that need to be, who are holding those relationships, that do need to be supported in order to be able to do that. But focusing on a core team of people who hold, like the weavers within those communities, are just critical. And then there's the other thing. So Joe has referenced those in his in many of his talks, the common land model, and actually going into the common land model is really helpful.
And I think with that, just to add, a lot of that is about growing our capacity. And so Joe kind of frames it that say that we got $100 million or $1 billion, numbers that we are too afraid to even think of or talk about. And yet, as Joe mentioned, the Seattle light rail expansion, just ST3 was a $58 billion light rail expansion. So if that kind of money came in, do we have the capacity to allocate it equitably to watershed and landscape projects? And the answer is no, we don't. We lack that capacity. And because of that, governments and corporations and very, wealthy people are able to take advantage of those systems and get those pools of money. And the people who are on the ground doing the work are the most busy doing the work and don't have the time to get lawyers, to get grant writers, to get all the things that you need to play the system to actually be supported. And so how do we support their work? How do we see them funded? How do we see them resourced in the ways that they need to be? So with that being said, Sam, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon, and thank you guys for this event. I wanted to share and kind of offer something as I explore on Nacotchunk and Piscataway lands here outside of Washington, D.C. Getting some bioregional work started here because I see that as really fundamental, right? I sort of see the cultural and participatory identity as being really fundamental to guiding any sort of transition or planning or policy work we'll do in the area. But even more fundamental than that, and I think Brandon alluded to it in some of the points, I think it's really present here, is I'm thinking even more fundamentally sort of coming at this from a paradigm of being embedded in place and sort of being part of nature and sort of a continuity of the land that we're walking on, that we're living in contrast to being apart from it or human exceptionalism or these other kinds of stories that we're often told. So I just wanted to share that that's something that I'm thinking a lot about. I don't know if anybody else is interested in talking about it or engaging around it. Basically, for me, it's like I really want to get to the participatory mapping and the bioregional mapping. But first, I feel it's almost fundamental to have a sort of gathering or a convening to start coming at this from the perspective that, well, we're part of this place. Because even then, the way that we come into the mapping and the bioregionalism and understanding the watershed, I think it's a little bit different. So yeah, this is just something I wanted to offer to other practitioners here. I haven't gotten started in this, but this is just the first things on my mind. And that's it. Check.
That was really wonderful, Sam. Claire, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's wonderful. And maybe I'll also point to, it's going to bubble up in some of the conversations, but the community art and ritual and celebration, we'll be having more of a focus on that next weekend. And that's where some of that can come in, but not all of it. But I love what you were bringing up.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think the story of place is really, really important. And I think our largest challenge is how do we help connect people and create accessible pathways that let people root in and connect to their place and learn these lessons, faster than they move around or you know, and also how do we penetrate through the kind of corporate monetized algorithms that are designed to keep people from connecting to place. So with that, Jan.
Well, it's interesting that the concept of money and funding got dropped so fast into our conversation, and I could feel the ripple of that in my body and around the group, just because we're so, I think we're taken over in our minds way more than we realize in terms of old patterns of thinking and competition and assumptions of striving and etc., and how that can erase that relationship that Sam was talking about in terms of being connected to the place we're in, and the shift of paradigm that requires. And so I just wanted to loop back again to the appreciation of the tour and how people have gathered, and that it was so relationally based, and that the method by which so much of this has been made as transparent and engaging as possible has been fantastic to experience. And then of course there is the now what. So it's great to have that ripple of excitement and connecting. And I think it is now we're into the sliding into what does that actually mean? And so important to really be mindful at this phase, because I think we can slide into old patterns so easily of the doing part and the funding part, and how that re-triggers our brains and our interactions with ourselves and our past and with each other, and absolutely with the earth. So I just feel that sense of the mindfulness and the integrity of what I've felt that Brandon and Claire, what you have held so far, if we can, and that what I think you experienced in the Edge Prize, some of those aspects of how do we keep so steeped in that, and how much we have to be unlearning as well as learning in this territory, and knowing that we're like in a 400-year process. Like this is not going to be landed right away, and yet at the same time we're in absolute extreme situations, and there are good people wanting to do good things. One of the thoughts I had was there are so many groups that are so caught up in, as Brandon mentioned, the competitive funding cycle, so much so they're so dedicated, they're very skilled, but they're very much in a silo and they're really caught in that. So it's very difficult for them to even get into this more relational space, because it's like, oh my God, one more meeting and 50 more people, and a vagueness I have to start at the beginning with and kind of help sort out, because all this stuff is going to take time to develop the relationships, to think it through together, and there needs to be a huge commitment for that. So I'm just aware that a lot of people that need to be in this room and the many rooms that we need to be in over the next while will have difficulty getting here, but they're doing good work. So it's just being mindful of those who are maybe so stressed with their attempts to try to do bioregional work maybe in some siloed way, but so caught up in that competitive funding, and they're so stressed that they can't keep their offices open or their staff going. So it's like really needing to keep weaving with them so that the extra work that this is going to require is supported as well in that transitional aspect. I could go on, but I won't. And over to the next person.
Well, Jan, before going on, I would like to just say that thank you. And also you raised some really important pieces. And I think sometimes when we look at the room of who's there and holding relationships, we think that that's who the team is. But really, what's become really clear is that it's going to take all different kinds of people to hold this. And there are some people that have been working in some of the areas that you talk about that are holding the integrity, but they're not necessarily in the same rooms that we're holding. There's this extension outward. And so, this cannot be just about it is about creating those third ways into the new, what do they call it? Anyway, it's requiring working with everyone, and it's become obvious that we need to be working and finding ways to work with all of those different groups of people. So I just wanted to put that in there. Yeah. And maybe just to put one more thing, and it's why I wanted to lead with that story, but just the story that I shared was just really the most powerful thing we can do is maintain the integrity of what we're holding. Because otherwise we're just basically repeating the same old patterns. And yeah, so. Brandon, I don't know if you've got anything you wanted to respond before we go to Margot.
No, Margot, please go ahead.
So I also just really want to thank you all for, what you're doing in this commitment. It's really given me a ton of hope and, insights that really are helping, me see a path here. And I'm just wondering, I want to go back to what Sam was saying briefly to understand if perhaps there's some way to think of a curriculum. Maybe it's multiple scales of a curriculum, multiple levels of access to think about, if you only had evenings, how do you understand your story of place better? If you have perhaps a weekend that you could visit a permaculture farm, what would be the path? And I recognize that this group has incredibly varying levels of, I don't know, sophistication might be the wrong word, but advanced knowledge of their story of place. And, it's yet another meeting or yet another commitment. But if some of those who have very high levels of that would be open to sharing, let's say, in some way that would be scalable, I would greatly appreciate, because, I think back to Joe's map of, where do we start? Well, the map shows you this is where the greatest damage is. So there's the healing here. But I would love to understand that in relation to where I can begin.
Do you want? Yeah. Maybe I'd love to just say, and this is kind of the early days of just thinking about this, but I think this is where the conversations are going to go on this week. But that a train the trainer program is something we've really been thinking seriously about. With mapping is really important, and then also as part of the bioregional learning that can be then supported as groups come together to look at story of place and what's arising around that. So yeah.
Thank you. And I love the idea of using the arts as well. Perhaps there's a way to leverage thinking about poetry or something to help one connect in that way. But really appreciate this concept of train the trainer.
I love everything you just said. I think that's awesome. I think that's going to be where groups like this and conversations like this will actually start to gain momentum and power and teeth, is really in that idea of how do we explore story of place, bioregional curriculum. Certainly there's the bioregional learning centers and creating these informational commons that can house knowledge, make it more accessible. But I think there's so many educators, place-based education. And then even also what's really been fun is to see the conversations of how people are going to start connecting and weaving across place. So let's bring if there's people working on something in Portland and there's something relevant on Vancouver Island, let's bring those people up. And then let's take people from Vancouver Island, and if there's something relevant over here, and then how can we start connecting these things together? And then I think, what Claire also touched on is there are a lot of ideas for moving forward. When we talk about more of the community aspect, there's also these ideas of, I think before we started, we had information sessions, and then we also had campfires where people could come together and talk. But I think ideas where people could come together and like have groups where we start exploring story of place, build curriculum for how to do that, train the trainers, whatever it is. But I just think that there's so many wonderful ideas that like, and that would be great to explore in a session for the second weekend, or keep talking, or follow up on. So
You know, I would love to just add one more thing in there, and that is the thing that has come up over and over again is that the people that are doing the work are so busy doing the work and just holding it together. And so the thing that is really powerful about actually focusing in a place is that when you start to do mapping processes, or in whatever form that's going to take, when it's in a place, it starts to kind of have a kind of relevance that is worth stretching yourself a little bit to be able to do when you're involved in the work. Because asking people, it really does require support to be able to hold those relationships. So I think sometimes people get really kind of concerned because it's as if we're asking them to do more than what they're already doing. This requires bringing those edges together so that they can be supported and actually amplify what they're doing. And so it's just, I just really wanted to emphasize that we're really cognizant of people being really pushed in the work, and this is meant to support them, and to be really paying attention to the fact that they don't need to be burdened with way more, but that landscape-based learning, actually starts to allow the groups that are doing that work to actually increase it, like amplify what they're doing. So yeah, Sam, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to briefly share a thought in response to some of what Margot mentioned, in particular around the idea of people not necessarily having time in their schedules to kind of visit and sit with these things, especially on a recurring basis. And I just wanted to offer one way that I'm thinking about this, which might be relevant, Margot, particularly on the sort of embedding in place in the cultural side. And that thought is simply that I'm thinking that, you know, if we do a gathering and we do a convening and we start sort of beginning some of these conversations and giving people new lenses to work with and some new sort of thoughts and tools that we can use, that those are things that people can carry with them. And, you know, maybe there's a need to practice and come back to it and reiterate. But some of these things, you know, once you learn it, it can really change the way that you move through the place you're in, like immediately and every day going forward from there. And so in that sense, you know, for people who are busier and might not have time for regular meetings, I'm at least anticipating that there can be a big impact from at least like an initial gathering, you know, to introduce some of these perspectives and bring that up. I could be wrong. But, and this is again more on like the embedding in place and cultural and paradigm side. But I just wanted to share that, Margot.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I just add too that I think one of the cool things about this whole event is, I mean, this got put together, first envisioned in like April, May, and then it just came together so fast. And I'm really excited for when we get to like, and I think of it like seeds being scattered and planted. And so I'm really excited when we get to actually do this again. And actually now we have all the people that we get to start with. And now we already have hundreds of people that we've connected with that we know are doing amazing work and kind of building these networks of trust, and how powerful that is. And I would love to see what type of gatherings people would like to see and come with that. So Claire, do you have any thoughts? Or okay, Brian, moving over to you.
Yeah, this is amazing reconvening, and I just again want to thank everyone who's been involved in this tour. It takes a village, and it is part, and in that, you know, I just want to acknowledge that the majority, if not all, people came together on this tour in a voluntary fashion, and They have given their time, their sweat, their expertise into pulling this off. And that is the majority of the people that we can reach with this effort. And so even though funding, along the discussion of funding, is really critical for large scale public or super degraded landscapes, the majority of action needs to happen everywhere all at once in people's backyard. And that really leads to the education aspect. And so how do you empower people to take action in place where they are? And so so much leverage can happen from an education standpoint. I run Inspiration Farm. We've been doing education programs here for 20 plus years. And there's people clamoring for the information. How do I grow food? How do I plant a food forest? How do I get pollinator species? How do I filter water? How do I, all of these things that we need to do to regenerate our landscapes back to a stable state. And they don't need funding. They just need education. And then there's thousands of hands in their backyards doing this work. And so I find education is really a key driver. Yeah, there's going to be some people that want to go out and, plant a forest. I was one when I was young. I planted thousands of trees. But, that takes a little bit more effort to get those balls rolling, and more funding and more coordination and more mapping and more studies and all the rest of it. But to energize and mobilize the people where they live, which are primarily urban neighborhoods and urban settings, to organize as communities, to neighborhood groups, garden clubs, these smaller activities, and give them the tools necessary to work with water, soil, plants, and climate, is super powerful. So that's where I've been focused, and it's fun. It's community building. It has all of these like potlucks and social gatherings and all these things. You have to make this fun for people. Otherwise, it's like, it's non-engaging. So the entertaining aspect.
Brian, it's funny you say that. It was a theme that came up over and over again, and the intergenerational learning of over and over again is some of the people who've been doing this for a really long time, and pairing that mentorship up with the youth who are clamoring for this. And actually, in a number of the places we were, when we were engaged with the schools, like 40 kids were suddenly signed up for the design school, but really pairing them up for intergenerational learning. And so, yeah, it's like a no-brainer that's something that will probably be a really strong, first piece that we'll be focusing on, just because there's a lot of energy around that, and sort of very clear engagement from all of the different respective parties to bring that together. So
yeah, and in my time doing education, it's like I love the education component of it, but it's the coordination, the outreach, the promotion, the administrative aspect that could be better coordinated with larger networks of people providing education. So those kind of things are where leverage points of influx of funds could go a long way.
Absolutely noted, and that is so important for you to bring that forward. The other piece that also brings in is the bioregional learning, that we're focusing on prioritizing the areas that really need the work too. Really that coordinated at a larger landscape watershed scale is really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Brandon, if you'd like to respond, and then go
Well,
to.
the thought that I have too is also, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet that is really important is the documentation component. And I think that's that again goes back to the people in this room are really important. But again, documenting everything that we're doing, and it's almost like, because we did do this all on a voluntary basis and everybody pitched in and did this thing, but what we're doing with that is making a case study, is looking at where it worked, where it didn't work, what are the tools and resources, and then how can we share that with other people, whether it's in our own landscapes and watersheds, and then or around the world. And so I think thinking about ways that we can bring in the documentation component of all of the lessons and wisdom and knowledge, and then also like the fun, the like, what are the ways that we want to make this movement different? Again, another thing that came up in terms of the fun was especially in the early movement, was the singing, the dancing, the poetry, the art. And so how do we bring that in, especially like, whether or not we're on Zoom or not? So, yeah. So, Howard, I saw your hand was up and then you put it down. So would you like to go next, Howard?
Well, thank you. And I want to commend all the thought that's gone into this and reflecting a little bit on the founding principles of our nonprofit, which means to be the first of its kind of a carbon trust. We've been focused on scalability and replicability, which I think means a lot of attention to process, as you were saying, documenting what works. You've been on quite a journey and you've seen a lot of examples of place-based people doing things that fit their setting and achieve results. And the idea of education, I think, is to come up with a way of transferring the knowledge. And if there could be a process that is developed from really what we observe in the travels as good practices that work, that convene people, that build community, that get stakeholders to cooperate so that people can have a right livelihood in this kind of work. And I think the keys to that really are having, I don't want to call it standardized, but having recognizable ways of taking the lessons from each other where folks have, and Inspiration Farms being an excellent example, to distill the transferable process that Brian and the folks operating there use, and similarly from River Farms, to tease out in the idea of good practices and processes that have been proven over time, so that these become models. And I can talk about what I saw last weekend in the Salish Sea. But as you go around and as these watershed groups, to really be focused on helping simplify and find a vocabulary that's easily understood for the processes and the practices that work, so that others can borrow from the experience and the success. And it's really it's hard to figure out all of the workings that it takes to convene people, to facilitate the discussions, and to get the results where people are taking action, the kind of action that leads to regeneration. So I think if there is at the organizational level a way, and I don't want to reduce it to format, but to have something that's consistent and recognizable so that folks know how to translate into a process and a parlance the way that we're working, and call them good practices, call them the lessons of experience, and more than the specifics about what to plant and when to plant it and how to work in the field. I think how an organization succeeds as a matter of process, as a matter of getting people engaged. And that's a lot of intangibles and a lot of consistent ways of working, that if those could be lifted up and described, obviously within the watershed, but across watersheds, so that these models can be made replicable, and we can learn from each other through these processes and practices.
Howard, you bring up a really important point, and it's part of a conversation that we're having, has been happening for a while, but is the collection of data has been so incoherent from jurisdiction to jurisdiction that it's been almost impossible to, at a large scale, see what's actually the impact of whatever is being done. And so that is part of the conversation that is starting to happen in some places, but really that needs to happen, is how do we aggregate the data so that we're actually starting to see on a landscape scale what the impact is. And then, I mean, the gritty detail of that, we absolutely need to have a learning process in place where we're starting to kind of, so that there are areas where particular innovations are being held, so that information commons has to be dynamic, and it also has to be accessible to people. People need to be able to see it in a transparent way, in a way that's actually the sense making, rather than it being the purview of institutions that kind of, there needs to be a sense making at a landscape scale, because people know if their place is thriving and there's an aliveness, how does it get translated into that, so that that's what's being held up. So Brandon, I don't know if you want to say anything.
I just wanted to react to that with the idea of there perhaps being a wiki process to have a consistent format and plug in the data and the practices in a way that will invite people to fit a format that doesn't put the burden on central people to figure it out, but to have templates in which people can input their data and their ideas.
Absolutely. That's what we talked about. And that's, I mean, that's really, those conversations need to happen here. We need to kind of be documenting them, but that is what we've been talking about. And there's lots of other people who've been having those conversations, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's important at this stage is not to get too focused into the tactical like tool that we might want to use, but really look at what is the information and everything. And I think what's amazing though is that we have whether they're in this room, certainly on this tour, I mean, like amazing people in this region who we can implement powerful things. I mean, I'm thinking of Ward Cunningham, who was, Wikipedia's in Portland and now is doing the federated wiki thing. Christina Bowen with Social Roots. We've got Clare Politano with Hilo. We've got, it's just like on and on and on and on. So just know that I think what we should start with though is the form and function. And I think what's nice too is what I think of when you were talking is we talked about, I guess, like resource and seeing projects supported with what they need. And we kind of talked about the financial lens, but I think there's so many other lenses that we could be talking about. And we all need help in different places. And I think as individual projects, we all fall down in different ways, whether it's marketing, whether it's online, whether it's Zoom. We were even talking today about how amazing was it that we had Stephen with us, who's like a professional videographer who's able to lend his support so that he can record all of these presentations. Like, that's amazing. And it's like, if we don't want to place the burden on every different projects, but when we collectively pool our resources, it just, and then, yeah, reduce the bottlenecks to let people connect. I think there's just a lot of power there. So we're tired of watching projects fail, not because they're bad ideas, but because we're just all lacking something. So I just wanted to give voice to that. And then, yeah, over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify rather quickly something that you talked about before that Joe has mentioned, which is, funding money and so on and so forth. It tends to be, a mildly negative sort of thing generally. I'm not a great fan of it for a start. But the point is, the people who are destroying this biosphere are horrendously, terribly funded in any way they want. So I think that's something we just have to think about, that we're up against, something that's, like I said, using money to ruin our biosphere. That's how it feels to me. That's all. That's really all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mike. If Claire doesn't have anything, back to you, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the topic of how important it is to document this work. And again, the practitioners are not the ones that can keep up with the documentation. And there needs to be the storytellers, the movie makers, the scientists that can take baseline studies, 1, 3, 5 years into a project, and put that. I'm not somebody that works on a like a numbers kind of spreadsheet evaluation. I look at how does the land feel? How is it receiving the water? How are things growing? What does the soil feel like under my feet? That's how I evaluate how a project's evolving. But some people like numbers. and if you're wanting to go after the money, you need to speak numbers to those people. And so we could enlist, college students to get these studies put together as a thesis project, or any number of organizations. But these storytellers from all ways, from putting movies together, from writing essays to putting spreadsheets with factual numbers, that is another really powerful pressure point. So that's been my experience. We've worked with college students here and doing soil surveys and other things over the years. And I'm like, okay, this is work. It's gonna express this to somebody that it's outside of my sphere, but it's important, and it needs to be funded, as well as the movie makers. They can tell a story that is super powerful, that expresses at an emotional level to people that numbers do not.
Can I say something? I would like to. I'm Cindy from Childs Creek Farm and Arts and Ecology Gardens, and I am really following and tracking everything that you folks are saying, and I'm hoping that the angst and frustration of having gone through kind of shutdown times and COVID, and then feeling like the sole person in the universe that can kind of hold things together here on my property, which is in the middle part of the Skagit and is in the ancestral lands of the Upper Skagit and Vi Hilbert and all of that, and is also the very first project to bring back the coho salmon here in the Skagit, which was the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Project for Childs Creek, which is here 13 acres of the property. And this has always been my dream, to bring this into a fruition with the food forest and the permaculture aspects of the upper part of the farm, and the wetland and the conservation in the lower part of the farm, to be such a story and an educational place for people. Yet, as I'm aging and I'm a single person here. I've brought people here through programs like the Willing Workers on organic farms and others, but I have been a bit at my wit's end about whether I can handle doing this, which has been my dream forever, and being a retired national park ranger and naturalist and master gardener, I think I'm perfectly poised for this becoming a success with a little bit of the impetus and the movement behind what we're trying to do here in the broader ecosystem, because I know, Brian, you're doing it already. You know, you guys are there. I've toured your farm before, been one of your many students over the years. I mean, you guys have been at it for what, 25 years also, at least, right? Yeah. So you've got a family there, and you do bring in interns and students and that sort of thing. And those are just the next steps. So what you said about the organizational piece, like I haven't been able to keep up the website. I mean, I'm out there in the garden, you know, trying to do subsistence vegetables to take to the concrete farmers market. So, you know, there's just a little bit of a difficulty in trying to get to the point of using what my best offerings are, which is no longer the putting the seeds in the ground and growing every single thing myself and doing every bit of the work myself. It's in giving the broad knowledge and the broad association, the sense of place, the connection to the entire watershed, how all of this is connected to the ancestral people and the indigenous people here. And, you know, that all of that is more my gift. And so, but I haven't yet gotten to that point of being able to do it because of what so many of you have discussed, that you were so busy trying to just keep the vegetables growing and the perennials and the, you know, the permaculture stuff going, and, you know, all the different things like that. But anyway, I see a lot of hope for connecting, you know, our broader Skagit watershed together. We have highly successful programs here already with the fisheries enhancement groups, the working with the tribes, and with a lot of other wonderful things that are happening along North Cascades Institute. The master gardeners are moving into more of a climate change and a less focused on, you know, grow your pretty flowers, to more of a focus of let's grow food and pollinator plants, you know, let's do the backyard garden stuff everywhere. And that's how we're going to save this landscape. So I'd just like to make that kind of as a plea and an offering. And I do have a hard time. I do kind of put up my arms when you say, okay, let's put more money behind this, you know, because then I feel like, well, just reinventing the wheel. Let's just make the wheel roll, you know, a little bit forward by bringing people together.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
really nicely said. And maybe it just doesn't have to be the biggest wheel to start with. But if we can roll it, that would be great. David, I see your hand up, and I just want to give a quick note to the time and just give people a little cue in. So I'm just going to give a little cue in, and then we'll turn it over to Dave. Basically, I think at about 7 or between 7 and 7:10, when we wrap this session up, we'll have a 5-minute break. And then we will be transitioning into a kind of a collective sense making, where we'll be able to take the conversation we've had. And we have Stacy here with us, who's going to help facilitate and guide us through using a Miro board, so that we'll collectively like add things to it. And Christine, if you like Zoom, oh boy, you're going to love playing with Miro boards. But hopefully it'll be easy to use and it'll work. But the idea is that we'll talk about kind of things that we'd like to see come out of this week and what we think is most important. We'll have a part where we'll break into breakout groups and just spend time talking about what's most important to all of us. And then we'll come back, reconvene, and have a little bit of share out. In terms of this weekend, I just also wanted to let people know that our first event tomorrow will be Joe's talk. Joe will be giving a keynote talk helping set context for Regenerate Cascadia and what we're doing. And then we have a lot of really wonderful events throughout the day. So do feel free to check the schedule there. We will have a lunch, quote unquote, at noon each day where we will be able to gather. We'd like to invite people to share about their organizations, any updates that they want to share, and other things. Tomorrow, after our lunch session, we will have a speed networking area where we'll be one-on-one breakouts to get to meet each other. And then at 5 o'clock on the Sunday, we will also have an offers, gifts, and I don't know, it's like it's a needs and exchange market, but we're calling it something else, and I can't remember what. I'm so sorry. But anyways, that'll be 5 o'clock, and that'll be a really nice opportunity for everybody to come together with some offers, and we'll be meeting by watershed and then by interests and other things. So a lot of great opportunities to explore. During the week, we will be inviting different areas to have time slots. So people in Seattle can all meet, people in Vancouver can all meet, and then a lot of these talks that were just brought up will make great discussion points for our sessions of exactly what we'd like people to explore next weekend. And so it's just such amazing conversation. So thank you everybody for joining us. It's very powerful. And with that, David, I would like to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for waiting.
Sure, and good to be here with you all. And it's great to see a number of my local Bellingham colleagues here. There's David McLeod, Brian Kirkliviet, and Stephen and Howard and a few others. So thank you for showing up and being part of this. I want to go back, if I could, to the whole discussion around the importance of relationships. And maybe this is a segue into our next section. But what I was hoping for this week is that there's a significant focus on skills and structures and processes and how to do that, starting with whatever Regenerate Cascadia has that you could inform us about, whether there's things in some library that you have online that could help with that, or just ideas you might have. And then we can brainstorm together, perhaps in an open space area around this, and share some of the good ideas I've been hearing from each other, and bring resources and links to share within the chat. So that's a big hope and desire of mine for the week. And along with that, I think Claire said earlier that there's really a strong need to hold the vision for this whole process. And to hear about more of that, I'm a little concerned with this bigger process of having all these different regions and giving a fair amount of autonomy to each of the regions, that the vision, there's a possibility of the vision being different in different regions. And that may be appropriate to a certain degree, but it could be too loose where it doesn't hold together across regions. So I'm curious, how do you suggest we walk that balance? And have you thought about that, or that fine line between too much adherence to a vision that's stultifying and doesn't work from one region to the other, but also the other end being too loose that it really doesn't have coherence, and what's happening in one region isn't relevant to another region at all? Just a thought around that. So those are a couple of hopes and desires that I have for the week, and I'll bring them over into the next section as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. And you keep reminding me of all the things I forgot or probably should have talked about. No. And so I think coming together around that shared vision is really, really important. That also goes into shared language and shared context. I was actually talking with Jay, before this meeting, and we were talking about the opening, and it's really important that we have a really clear understanding, because otherwise, even if we could walk away thinking that we're in agreement and then actually have two totally different ideas, and then it leads to trouble down the road. So I think for us, this is all step one, and getting the people and identifying the people. The couple components that I think that we will continue to bring in is like in terms of the technical side is that we do want to create a coherent platform somewhere, and we will be doing that through Regenerate Cascadia, and then using a multi-site to help people get up different standalone, like local pages. So Regenerate Whidbey, Regenerate Bellingham, Regenerate, and as defined by the people themselves. And then together, I think what'll be really important is that we have some type of what I call organizer DNA, that interconnective tissue where we have a shared purpose, vision, and we have that alignment. Also, I think it was brought up earlier, the principles and values, and making sure that we have those set out from day one, so that there is no confusion. And then the people who are leaning in because they want to be here and we're in agreement with one another. And so, I'll turn it over to Claire. Do you have any other thing you'd like to add there? And you're muted.
I think it's a really important point that you raised, David, and thanks, Brandon, for the piece that was coming up for me was the concept of subsidiarity, which is the lowest level of decision making is where decisions need to be made. And that if you can't make that decision at that level, you move up a level. And so really, I think that the collection of data so that we can actually look at large systems as whole systems is really critical. And that actually helps to hold a vision of, like, how do we hold the vision of the health of an entire bioregion? And there are other pieces. Brandon's already spoken to them, so I'm not just going to repeat them. But those are sort of some of the pieces. But I think that that's a really important piece to keep looking at. But yeah, just to bring those in.
I'm going to just chime in here and say how important it is to not look at techniques or strategies or anything, but to have the ethics and the principles really at the forefront. Because really, when it all comes down to it, it's about observation and interpretation on the landscape. And it's about being able to interpret the landscape in what it needs. So it's intuitive as much as education based. It is not it's not a cookie cutter picture that you can fit on one landscape and the other one. It's not a set of like techniques. It's basically place-based design. And it's about how to observe and interpret and work within that landscape. And that's all based on ethics and principles.
Yes, Brian, and just to say that the kind of platform, the kind of processes that we wanted to be able to hold were to really reinforce exactly what you're saying. Yeah, like the transparency, the hoping to have a platform that is able to help people see the transparency of how decisions are made and information commons, so that there's also a process where people's sense of agency is able to, which speaks to exactly what you're bringing in, that intuitive piece. Yeah, so anyway, so those have been really, those were actually the core pieces that Brandon and I came together on. It was really exciting to find someone else that was like as doggedly determined to hold those as we were. And so we had people who, just whatever we came against, it was whatever we worked through, we both found that we were holding that as determinately with, so just to say that's really important. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'll just jump in too. I think something important to name is, because I see it's being said, protocols, values, ethics, and I think a really important part of that too is how we treat each other. That we treat each other with mutual respect and that we treat each other well. And I think so oftentimes that really gets left out, and it all becomes about the work that we're doing and this or that. And I just think that we need to create spaces where it's like they're safe spaces for us to come, learn, grow, try, fail, there's going to be really challenging things. And I think that as we come together to work together, that we treat each other well, and that's like a base, that regardless of anything else. So I just want to throw that in there too. And with that, so we're at about 7:10. So what I would love to invite is maybe we just take like a 5-minute break, and feel free to hang out, chat, talk, and then we can reconvene maybe at, I'm not going to end the Zoom. I'll keep the Zoom open, but at 7:15 we can come back, and then we can do a little bit of learning about what our next activity is. And we have Stacy, who can kind of also maybe take over to help start guiding us through our next activity. And thank you so much, everybody. It's just wonderful to have everybody